We discovered a food web in the caverns of Mars. It wasn't pretty. I'm leaking this top secret information in the internet of the American people, in whose country the organisms are located, as well as for the rest of the people from this earth. I do hope, however, that the matter will be contained before it becomes a worldwide concern. I can barely think straight without hearing the squelch of boots, without hearing those screams that just came before. We were out of our depth. We were treading waters not meant for us. I'm a member of a team of scientists who had been working around the clock on a recent sample that had come back from Mars. It had come back from Mars on its own. A top-secret mission that had been planned to drill into one of Mars's lava tubes cavern structures, based on promising data gathered from the surrounding area. Among that data was the presence of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, who were seen as evidence of dead organisms. Stronger evidence was the discovery after digging near certain lava tubes. Fossils of fossils younger than we had expected. Still younger fossils were discovered further down the strata. These and other residues had released compounds hinted more strongly than ever before at the possibility of current life on Mars. They insulated deep beneath the surface, as many of us had already hypothesized. Armed with stronger evidence of present life and the desire to be the first to discover it, a secretive mission was therefore launched with robotics capable of drilling deep. For up to 1 billion years of Mars's history, its northern hemisphere had been covered with an ocean. We have deduced this from the outflow channels and the fewer and younger impact craters in the northern hemisphere. Early Mars would have had more in common with early Earth than the dry and cold Mars we know today. Although the first billion years of Earth's history was barely time for Earth's organisms to have evolved into multicellularity, the greater geophysical and climatic volatility of early, still relatively warm and wet Mars likely put that planet's life on a different timescale for evolution. We believe that more extreme selective pressures could have driven evolution quickly on Mars, so that by the time both water and life had sunk underground, already some hardy and resourceful organisms might have been born. Life might have been plentiful and diverse rather quickly, if still primitive in its sensory and cognitive abilities. As eons passed and Mars's protective atmosphere was whittled away, due to its size and distance from the sun, warmer, wetter periods would have become less common. The water on its surface would have eventually frozen and sublimated or accumulated near its poles. Any life on that might survive on the Martian surface would have been similar or smaller, less complex, and equipped with extremophile adaptations. Either that or life on Mars would need to exist deep beneath its surface, where warmer liquid water could occur and life would be better protected from dangers related to an inadequate atmosphere. Mars has had a great deal of volcanic activity. Scientists have noted evidence of its lava tubes and have speculated about the cavern structures that would likely exist. It was on a recent mission that will here go unnamed that we drilled into one of those lava tubes using robotics from a special lander. We sent a smaller robot down to investigate. Deep under the surface of Mars, where temperatures are warmer, and Spelunker robot found a large underground reservoir of liquid water. Next to that reservoir was a damp, rocky shore. The Spelunker robot snapped pictures and took samples. It sent data up to the lander above, which sent data back to us. It had found what could be one of the many sequestered water habitats beneath the surface of Mars. Literally and metaphorically, it shined a light on some of those secrets. I wish Mars kept that from us. There were more than microbes in that cavern. There were macroscopic multicellular organisms. They were the kinds of things that could not only be observed with the naked eye, but were surprisingly large despite factors we had assumed would inhibit the metabolisms of many living things of Mars. The way things lived and interacted, even from afar, was enough to birth feelings of disquiet. There were organisms that were mobile, others that were less so. Thriving in the water were crustacean-like animals with claws and antennae. Echinoderm-like animals and resembling starfish with larger teeth and bony growths, and shellfish-like creatures with strange sensory organs protruding from their shells. A mold-like fungus covered most of the rocky shore. Things crawled and grew with that fungus. One of these was an organism resembling a worm, which might have burrowed in from the surrounding moist strata to feed on other things in the cavern. A land stalk with a whip resembling a flagellum used its whip to kill and bring its prey from the water. In water and on land, we found both micro and macroscopic chemotrophic producers. Producers that did not need sunlight to create food. Oddly, it was the fungus that seemed to dominate the food web. At least the slice we could see of it over time and further sampling analysis. We hypothesized that the fungus was controlling the stalks and worm-like creatures that were living in it. It seemed similar to what a certain fungal parasite on Earth would do to ants. However, it would appear to gain control over every other organism in the food web that came in prolonged contact with it, including any of the crustacean-like or ectodermic-like creatures that happened to make their way into it and were still alive. Further investigation on the microscopic level, using cutting-edge tools that the Spelunker robot was equipped with, showing us a diverse array of bacteria that were working the symbiosis and the fungus. Among other functions, those bacteria seemed to be sampling the genetic material as well as the living and non-living molecular composition of the host bodies. Still further time and analysis, along with the common sense observation that there seemed to be two types of everything, even contrasted rock. We found that what the fungus was actually doing, in symbiosis with the bacteria, was creating a shell or exoskeleton around the living or non-living creatures alike. From there, the exoskeleton was slowly absorbed the material of what was inside as it became more and more like it. Then, like a locust shredding its skin, the exoskeleton would open itself up and deposit the host. Unlike a shed husk, however, the exoskeleton would continue to live out its existence. It would do so as if it were a bizarre and more aggressive version of the host. Its appearance was not exactly the same. There were some modifications. Presumably, the exoskeleton was hollow on the inside, once it had shed itself from its host, at least initially. Meanwhile, the host, deprived of much of its original body and functioning, would die not long after the exoskeleton parasite had shed itself. We were thus mistaken about our initial theory of a parasite controlling its host. Instead, by covering the host and creating an exoskeleton, the parasitic fungi bacteria colony was making strange copies of living and non-living matter alike. We lost transmission with the Spelunker robot, but before we did, we had already observed the Spelunker robot being coated with the fungi bacteria colony. The lander was infected too. The last transmissions were received from it and showed the spelunking robot approaching the lander until it collided with it. I suppose the fungi bacteria colony must have piggybacked off of the technology of those robotics to enhance the intelligence, as well as to enhance its Martian surface hardiness and outer space hardiness. How else could it have done what it did? It was not really the spelunking robot that came out of that hole, no more than it was the lander that repurposed itself for Mars' ascent on its own, then later approaching and entering Earth's atmosphere. It would have shot down. It would have incinerated to lifeless dust. A number of human desires got away of that. Enough of those calling shots had wanted to see what had come from Mars. They had wanted to see what had come back on its own. Efforts were made to contain it. Safety precautions, safety equipment. A team was assembled. I'm on that team. So was the individual I preferred to Dr. B, because I would like to preserve his family's anonymity. Neither I or my colleagues were willing to admit to each other that panic had threatened to surge over our excitement. Every time we donned our suits and prepared to go into that containment room to view the lander and its contents, why shouldn't we panic after what we had seen from afar? I suppose it was professionalism that held our tongues, and promises of prestige and our scientific curiosity held our hands steady. Dr. B was infected. Despite our best precautions and most advanced protective equipment, we think it has something to do with the array of bacteria in the fungi bacteria colony and its ability to sample and screw around with the molecules of everything it covers, including what we wear. Dr. B was infected and lay for a week, quarantined in our compound's emergency wing. During that time, what covered Dr. B thickened, turned gray, it hardened, and mushroomed with bone-like growths. Dr. B was on his way to becoming a part of the food web. We were afraid to cut the exoskeleton husks. We didn't want Dr. B to die. It was our main reason to delay any rate. So when Dr. B, or the exoskeleton resembling Dr. B, broke out of his containment and left a slop of murdered bodies in its wake, we justified our reluctance because of its being cruel to Dr. B's survival. Dr. B did not survive. Not at length, anyway. Crawling among the slush pile of corpses was a thing with nubs for arms and nubs for legs. Its eyes, nose, and lips had digested by the exoskeleton parasite that had been covering it. Now the only thing covering it in place of the skin was the fungi bacteria colony that was flaking off the blood and mush it crawled through. He called out to us to kill him. We kept him alive probably longer than we should have. Worst dream I've ever had. Unfortunately, a true story. I must have been in the 6th grade when this particular incident happened. Anyways, once I had a dream that started out rather nice. It was my birthday and I had some friends over. There must have been 6 or 7 of us playing in the back of my house, playing Halo on our Xboxes. We were being quite loud, but then I even began to hear screams coming from the front of my house. I told all my buds to quiet down and turn everything off for the moment while I checked it out. I walked slowly down my dark, long hallway and came up to my little sister trying to console this girl who must have been a freshman or sophomore in high school that had been babysitting her, as for some reason my parents weren't home. I walked up to this rather beautiful girl that I had met or remembered seeing in reality and asked her what was wrong. She told me she'd gone out to her car to grab something and had seen something large that resembled a wolf outside the pasture next to my house. I told her that it wasn't possible and that there weren't any wolves in our area, but she insisted it was true. I wanted her to feel safe and be able to retrieve whatever she was after in her car, so I grabbed my dad's hunting rifle from our laundry room next to our front door and walked out. As soon as I stepped into my driveway, I saw those glowing yellow eyes hovering at the top of the tall grass a few yards from the fence. I was honestly afraid of what those eyes might belong to, so I raised the barrel and made sure I've got a good enough shot in the head or the body of this thing. As I did so, it rose even higher above the grass, revealing itself further in the light of the full moon. It was a wolf, but it was larger than I've ever imagined. The girl had been clinging to my shoulders, looking above my right one and sobbing all the while. I tried to calm her down as I felt like shit. I'm sorry. That made me laugh. I tried to calm her down as I felt like shitting myself, but still attempting to seem like a brave soul. I fired the rifle just to the right of the creature, hoping to scare it off, but to no avail. It seemed to anger it. It darted over the fence with no effort and inched toward me. It felt as if it all happened in a slow motion as it got closer and closer to myself and my sister's supposed babysitter. It had been close enough to stick its tongue out and lick my face, as I was too afraid to even re-rack the other bullet into the chamber, while it had made its way toward us. Needless to say, there wouldn't be any hope for us. As all of this happened, I was too focused on the wolf to notice that the girl had become dead silent, but still clinging to my shoulders, as I stared directly into this creature's terrifying eyes. I began to hear whispers in my ear coming from the babysitter. I couldn't make out what she was saying, as it would sound like any language I had ever heard before, even to this day. The next thing I know, her hands slowly make her way down her shoulders and onto my back. She started digging into my back with her nails, and continued down to the small of my back. Just as she stopped, the creature in front of us opened his mouth and made an advance toward my head. I had woken up from the dream, and just as his teeth closed around my head, keep in mind that I wouldn't lie about what came next, and I experienced some very surreal and unexplainable, very much so supernatural things to my life, but it topped quite a few. I felt this stinging pain coming from my back and thought it must have been some sort of emotional or subconscious residue of the dream I had awoken from. But no, this was something terrifying more genuine than that. I ran to my dad's bathroom next to my room and looked in the mirror to find scratches all the way down my back, just as I felt in my dream. My parents tried to explain that I'd have to done this to myself when I was dreaming, especially my dad, since he'd plenty experienced moving somewhat violently in his sleep. The way those scratches were, and even though I considered by many to be double jointed, there was no way I could have done it by myself. It came from her right hand, and I'd never been able to wrap my arm around and then flex my wrist at such an angle to force my nails into my skin hard enough to scratch like that. I even had a terrible habit of biting my nails, so I didn't have long enough nails to scratch my skin in such manner. I have been telling this story ever since the night it happened, but getting it off my chest, well, all the while hadn't made it easier to sleep each night. TLDR, I had a dream one night about a huge wolf and a girl that scratched down my back. Woke up with those same scratches on my back. Drip, drip, drip. One day, a girl who lived in the country's parents went away for a few days. The only thing keeping her company was a small dog, whom she loved dearly. The first day her parents went smooth. She ate breakfast, lunch, supper, then went to bed. Her dog was asleep under her bed and licked her fingers to comfort her, as she was a bit scared being home alone for so long. She woke to a sound coming from her upstairs bathroom. Drip, drip, drip. She went to check it out. Her sink was leaking a slight amount of water that was slightly on. She shut this thing off and went to bed. The next day, the same as the first. Breakfast, lunch, and supper, then bed. Just as usual, her dog would lick her fingers. She woke up to the sound of water coming up from the bathroom and the downstairs kitchen. Drip, drip, drip. She turned both sinks off and dismissed it as a mistake. The next day was slightly different. She woke up and then went straight downstairs. Her dog didn't follow. She went the whole day without knowing where her dog went. It was late, and she decided to go to bed. She put her fingers down and felt her dog licking her fingers. She sighed, a breath of relief. She woke up to a sound coming from her attic door. Drip, drip, drip. She went to investigate. She opened the door and screamed. What was in front of her was her dog hanging from the ceiling, gutted through his stomach. On the wall beside the dog was a sentence written in the dog's blood. Humans can live